Victor Kane stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the city skyline glittering before him like a sea of diamonds. To an outsider, this view symbolized his success. His empire built on years of hard work, strategic deals, and relentless ambition. Yet, as Victor gazed at the horizon, he felt nothing but emptiness. The lavish furnishings, the expensive art adorning his walls, the pristine silence of his home. They were trophies of a race he no longer remembered running. The parties had grown dull, the accolades hollow, and the people surrounding him distant, more interested in his wealth than in him as a person. Victor's journey to the top had been a relentless climb. Born into a modest family, he had worked tirelessly to escape the constraints of his upbringing. His focus on success had cost him dearly. Relationships lost, dreams abandoned, and a growing chasm between himself and the younger man he once was, filled with hope and passion. Now, in his mid-40s, he had everything he thought he wanted: money, power, and influence. But it all felt like sand slipping through his fingers. That night, the weight of his disillusionment became unbearable. Tossing his phone onto the couch, Victor grabbed his coat and headed out. The city streets were alive with activity, yet he felt like a ghost moving through the crowd. His polished leather shoes clicked against the pavement as he wandered aimlessly, the hum of cars and chatter fading into a dull background noise. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't bear to stay in his sterile penthouse any longer. Eventually, his footsteps led him to a small park tucked away between towering buildings. The park was a relic of an older city, with rusting benches and trees whose roots cracked the pavement. Victor sank onto a bench, rubbing his temples as he stared at the ground. It was then that he noticed a boy sitting a few feet away, his legs swinging idly as he hummed a tune. The boy couldn't have been older than 10, with messy hair and clothes that looked worn but clean. The boy looked up and met Victor's gaze, his eyes bright and curious. "You look lost," the boy said matter-of-factly. Victor blinked, startled by the directness. "Maybe I am," he replied, his voice heavier than he intended. The boy tilted his head, as if considering something. "I'm looking for something too," he said. "The hidden path." Victor frowned. "The hidden path? What's that?" The boy shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's what my mom used to tell me about. She said it's where you find what you're really looking for. Happiness, peace, all the good stuff." Victor leaned back, skeptical yet intrigued. "And you think you'll find it in a place like this?" The boy nodded confidently. "I think you find it anywhere if you know how to look." Victor let out a dry chuckle. "Well, good luck with that." The boy didn't seem offended by his sarcasm. Instead, he studied Victor with a curious intensity. "You should help me look. Maybe it'll help you too." Victor hesitated, unsure why he felt tempted to entertain the idea. He didn't believe in fairy tales or hidden paths, but something about the boy's quiet confidence stirred a long-buried sense of wonder. "All right," he said, surprising even himself. "Where do we start?" The boy grinned, his enthusiasm infectious. "Let's just start walking. You'll see." As they left the park, Victor felt an odd sense of relief. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about meetings, contracts, or stock prices. Instead, he was following a boy with no plan, no destination, and a strange belief in something Victor couldn't begin to understand. The city, once a backdrop to his ambition, seemed different under the boy's watchful gaze. Small details, a street lamp casting a golden glow, the laughter of strangers passing by, the soft rustle of leaves, seemed sharper, more vivid. Victor didn't realize it then, but something was shifting within him. The boy's presence, his unshakable optimism, and his enigmatic quest for the hidden path were beginning to chip away at the walls Victor had spent years building around himself. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Victor Kane felt curious. Before moving forward, do not forget to subscribe and share. Now, coming back as they walked away from the park, Victor found himself questioning why he was following a strange boy on this whimsical quest. He wasn't sure if it was the boy's innocence, his peculiar sense of wisdom, or simply Victor's own need for distraction. Sam, as the boy eventually introduced himself, strode ahead with a spring in his step. his small hand brushing against bushes and fences as if they held secrets he was uncovering. "Do you even know where we're going?" Victor asked, trying to keep up. Sam turned and flashed a mischievous grin. "Not really. That's the fun part." Victor smirked despite himself. "Fun isn't usually wandering around aimlessly, you know?" Sam shrugged. "You call it aimless. I call it exploring." They meandered through the city's quieter streets, the chaos of rush hour traffic fading behind them. Sam led them to a patch of overgrown greenery nestled between two abandoned buildings. It looked like the remnants of a small park that had long since been forgotten. Victor raised an eyebrow as Sam crouched near a flower growing stubbornly through a crack in the concrete. "Look at this," Sam said, pointing. "It's not supposed to be here, right? But it's still growing. It's kind of like it decided it didn't care about the rules." Victor stared at the boy, then at the flower. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Sam stood up, brushing his hands off on his pants. "Mom used to say flowers like this were reminders that even in the ugliest places, something beautiful can happen." Victor felt a twinge of something he couldn't quite name. Admiration, maybe, or envy at how the boy could find meaning in something so small. He didn't know if he believed in lessons from stray flowers, but there was a quiet charm in the way Sam saw the world. They kept walking, and soon Sam stopped in front of a dimly lit bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The sign above the door was missing several letters, and the display window was coated in a thin layer of dust. Without hesitation, Sam pushed the door open, and a bell jingled faintly as they stepped inside. The smell of old paper hit Victor immediately, a mix of must and nostalgia. Shelves were crammed with books, their spines worn, titles barely legible. An older man behind the counter looked up and gave them a welcoming nod. Sam wandered the aisles, his fingers trailing across the books as though he was searching for something specific. Victor followed, feeling out of place but unwilling to leave. After a few minutes, Sam pulled a small book from the shelf and held it out to Victor. It was a collection of proverbs, the kind of thing Victor would have scoffed at a week ago. "Here," Sam said. "Pick a page." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Pick a page? What for?" "Just do it," Sam said, holding the book open. His tone wasn't pushy, just patient, as though he had all the time in the world. With a sigh, Victor flipped through the pages and stopped at random. He pointed to a line. Sam read it aloud. "The meaning of life is not to be found, but to be created." Victor blinked. "That's vague." "Maybe, but it's also true," Sam said, looking up at him with those bright, unblinking eyes. "What if the hidden path isn't somewhere you go? What if it's something you make?" Victor didn't respond. He wasn't sure he had an answer to that. Before he could overthink it, the shopkeeper appeared beside them, holding a cup of tea in his gnarled hands. "That's a good one," the old man said, gesturing at the book. "Sometimes, it's the simplest ideas that make the biggest difference." Victor wasn't sure if the man was talking about the proverb or something else entirely. Either way, he felt an uncomfortable stirring in his chest, a sense that this moment, this odd, dusty bookstore and the strange boy beside him, was more significant than it should have been. Sam thanked the shopkeeper before heading for the door, motioning for Victor to follow. Outside, the air felt cooler, and Victor noticed that the city's lights seemed a little softer, less harsh. He glanced down at the boy walking beside him and found himself wondering what else Sam might have to teach him. For now, though, Victor decided he wouldn't ask too many questions. He'd let the boy lead the way and see where this strange journey would take them. The narrow streets of the neighborhood Sam led Victor to felt like stepping into another world. The polished storefronts and modern glass facades Victor was used to were replaced with crumbling brick buildings, faded signs, and graffiti-covered walls. Children played with makeshift toys in the alleys, their laughter cutting through the muted hum of distant traffic. Laundry lines stretched between buildings, shirts and sheets flapping in the breeze like quiet flags of resilience. The air smelled of cooking spices, damp concrete, and something faintly metallic, a sharp contrast to the sterile perfume of Victor's penthouse. Sam skipped ahead, his small frame weaving effortlessly through the uneven sidewalks. Victor followed cautiously, his polished shoes feeling out of place against the cracked pavement. A street musician sat on an overturned milk crate near the corner, his violin tucked under his chin. He played a haunting melody, the kind that clung to the edges of memory, familiar yet unplaceable. His case lay open in front of him, a few coins scattered inside. Sam stopped, mesmerized. He tilted his head, swaying slightly to the music. "He's really good," he said softly, as if speaking any louder would shatter the moment. Victor crossed his arms. "Good enough to be in an orchestra. Instead, he's here." Sam glanced at him. "Why does that matter?" Victor hesitated. "Because he's wasting his talent. He could be doing something bigger, more important." The musician finished his piece and looked up, his gaze meeting Victor's. For a moment, Victor felt exposed, as if his thoughts had been too loud. The man smiled faintly, setting his violin down as Sam approached. "That was amazing," Sam said earnestly. "What's the song called?" The musician chuckled. "It doesn't have a name. I just play what I feel." Sam's eyes widened. "You made it up?" "Every note," the man said, his voice tinged with pride. Victor lingered a few steps behind, unsure whether to join the conversation. Eventually, the musician turned his attention to him. "What about you, mister? Ever play an instrument?" Victor shook his head. "No, I never had the time." The musician raised an eyebrow, his expression thoughtful. "Tons of funny thing. We all think we don't have enough of it until we realize we're not using what we have." Sam looked up at Victor, as if daring him to respond. Victor shifted uncomfortably, unsure why the comment felt so pointed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp bill, and dropped it into the violin case. "You should record your music," Victor said, his tone practical. "It could make you some money." The musician smiled again, this time with a hint of sadness. "Money's useful, sure, but it's not why I play." Sam nodded as if the man had just revealed a profound truth. Victor, on the other hand, felt a flicker of irritation. He wasn't sure if it was the man's words or the fact that they made him question his own priorities. As they walked away, Victor couldn't shake the encounter. "Why do you think he stays there?" he asked Sam, more to fill the silence than anything else. Sam shrugged. "Maybe that corner is his hidden path." Victor frowned. "A hidden path that leads nowhere." "Not nowhere," Sam said firmly. "Just somewhere you don't understand yet." They continued deeper into the neighborhood, the streets growing quieter. Sam stopped in front of a mural painted on the side of a building. It depicted a series of figures, men, women, and children, holding hands, their faces vibrant with colors that seemed to glow even in the fading light. Above them, a single word was scrawled in bold letters: "Together." Sam studied the mural for a long time. "I think this is part of it," he said almost to himself. Victor followed his gaze. "Part of what?" "The hidden path," Sam replied, his voice soft. "It's not just about finding something. It's about people, helping each other." Victor tilted his head, staring at the mural. The figures' faces seemed to shift under his gaze, their painted smiles growing heavier, more complicated. He thought of his empire, built on individualism and ruthless efficiency. How much of his life, he wondered, had been spent pushing people away instead of pulling them closer. Sam tugged on his sleeve, pulling him from his thoughts. "Come on," the boy said, his voice lighter now. "There's more to see." They passed a small bakery where the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of rain beginning to fall. The baker, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands, waved at them from the window. Sam waved back, his smile wide and genuine, though Victor noticed they hadn't exchanged a single word. It was as if Sam understood a language Victor had forgotten how to speak, a silent connection to the world around him. By the time they reached the edge of the neighborhood, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life. Sam turned to Victor, his expression serious. "Did you see it?" he asked. "See what?" Victor replied, confused. Sam gestured vaguely behind them. "All of it. The music, the mural, the people. That's the path. It's everywhere. You just have to look." Victor opened his mouth to argue, to explain why it wasn't that simple, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself nodding, the weight of the day settling heavily on his shoulders. Sam smiled, satisfied, and started walking again. Victor followed, wondering for the first time if the boy might actually be right. The two of them arrived at a quiet street where a weathered building sat at the corner, its facade peeling and windows clouded with grime. The sign above the door, barely legible, read Horizon Community Center. Sam stopped in front of it, tilting his head as if studying something invisible. Victor stood beside him, frowning. "This place doesn't look like much," Victor muttered. Sam turned to him, an almost challenging look in his eyes. "Looks aren't everything. Let's go inside." Victor hesitated, his hand instinctively reaching for his wallet, a reflex born of years of equating money with solutions. What could a place like this possibly offer? Still, he followed Sam, his curiosity outweighing his skepticism. The air inside was warm, filled with the hum of quiet conversations and the occasional clatter of dishes. The interior was modest. A few tables and chairs scattered around, a small stage at one end, and a kitchenette at the other. People moved about with purpose. A woman ladled soup into bowls. A man carried folded blankets to a corner, and a young girl sorted through a pile of donated clothes. There was no pretense here, just people helping each other in ways that felt honest and necessary. Sam walked ahead, weaving through the room like he belonged there. Victor trailed behind, feeling out of place in his tailored coat and expensive shoes. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair approached them, wiping her hands on an apron. She smiled warmly at Sam. "Back again, are you?" she said, her voice soft but strong. Sam grinned. "Had to bring him," he said, jerking his thumb toward Victor. The woman turned her gaze to Victor, her smile unwavering. "You look like you could use some tea," she said, gesturing toward a table. Victor blinked, caught off guard. Sure," he mumbled, sitting down awkwardly as she disappeared into the kitchenette. Sam slid into the seat across from him, resting his elbows on the table. "This place is important," he said simply. Victor glanced around. "Important how?" "You'll see," Sam replied cryptically, leaning back in his chair. Before Victor could press him further, the woman returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea. She set them down with a nod, then paused, studying Victor more closely. Her brow furrowed, and then her expression softened. "Wait a minute," she said. "You're Victor Kane, aren't you?" Victor stiffened, unprepared for the recognition. "Yes," he said cautiously. "Do we know each other?" The woman smiled, though her eyes were tinged with something deeper, gratitude, maybe, or nostalgia. "Not directly, but years ago, when this place was on the verge of shutting down, we got a donation from a foundation you were running. It was more than money, it saved this place. And because of that, it saved a lot of people." Victor frowned, trying to remember. His mind sifted through the haze of deals and projects. But the memory was faint, a distant echo of a time when he'd still cared about causes bigger than himself. "I didn't think it mattered," he said finally, his voice quieter than he intended. "Oh, it mattered," the woman said firmly. "More than you'll ever know." Sam watched the exchange with a quiet intensity, his hands wrapped around his mug. Victor glanced at him, the boy's words from earlier, about the hidden path, lingering in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him. Pride, perhaps, but also a strange, aching regret for having let that part of himself fade. The woman excused herself, leaving Victor and Sam alone at the table. Victor stared into his tea, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Why didn't I keep going?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Sam tilted his head. "Keep going with what?" Victor sighed. "Helping, doing things that mattered. Somewhere along the line, I stopped. Got too busy chasing something else." Sam didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "It's not too late, you know." Victor looked up, meeting the boy's steady gaze. There was no judgment there, only a simple truth. The words settled over him like a challenge, one he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Before he could respond, a commotion near the kitchenette caught their attention. A group of volunteers had gathered, laughing as they unloaded a box of donated toys. The scene was so ordinary, so unremarkable, and yet Victor couldn't look away. These people, with their patched clothes and tired smiles, had something he'd lost: purpose, connection, and a sense of belonging. Sam stood up, motioning for Victor to follow him again. They wandered to the back of the room, where a bulletin board was pinned with photos, notes, and drawings. One picture in particular caught Victor's eye, a black and white snapshot of a young woman holding a small child in front of the community center. The woman's smile was radiant, and the child, Victor squinted, his breath catching, looked unmistakably like Sam. Victor turned to the boy, his voice unsteady. "That's you?" Sam nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's me and my mom. We used to come here when things were really hard." Victor stared at the photo, the pieces falling into place. The woman's earlier words took on new weight. His forgotten donation hadn't just saved a building. It had saved lives, Sam's included. Victor looked at the boy, his chest tightening. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sam shrugged, his voice soft. "I didn't think you'd understand." Not until now. Victor felt a lump rise in his throat. For the first time in years, the relentless hum of his own thoughts quieted, replaced by something deeper, something that felt like hope. Before moving forward, do not forget to subscribe and share. Now, coming back as they left the community center, Victor felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, guilt, and a glimmer of something unfamiliar but welcome. Sam walked beside him, unusually quiet, his usual lively energy subdued. The evening had grown colder, and a sharp wind swept through the streets, carrying the scent of rain. Victor noticed Sam shivering slightly and instinctively draped his coat over the boy's thin shoulders. "You okay?" Victor asked, his voice softer than usual. Sam looked up at him with a small, tired smile. "Yeah, just a lot to think about." Victor nodded, understanding the feeling. He felt like his entire world had shifted inside that crumbling building. The revelation about his long-forgotten donation and its impact on Sam's life was something he hadn't fully processed yet. It was like finding a thread that connected him to something meaningful, something real, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. They continued walking in silence, the city's lights casting long shadows on the wet pavement. Victor's mind raced with questions, but he held back, sensing that Sam needed the quiet. It wasn't until they reached a small park that Sam finally stopped, sitting down on a bench. He pulled Victor's coat tighter around himself, his movements slow and deliberate. Victor sat beside him, frowning. "You sure you're okay? You don't look great." Sam shrugged, his gaze fixed on a patch of grass. "I get tired sometimes." "It happens?" "Tired how?" Victor pressed, his concern growing. Sam hesitated, then sighed. "I don't want to talk about it right now. Let's just sit here for a bit." Victor wanted to push further, but something in Sam's tone stopped him. Instead, he leaned back and looked up at the sky. The clouds were thick, and the faint glow of the city lights reflected off them, creating a dull, yellowish hue. The air was heavy with the promise of rain. Minutes passed in silence before Sam spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think people can really change?" Victor turned to him, startled by the question. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'd like to think so." Sam nodded slowly. "Me too." Victor studied the boy, noting the pallor of his skin and the shadows under his eyes. He didn't want to acknowledge the sinking feeling in his gut, but it was hard to ignore. "Sam," he said carefully, "if there's something going on, you can tell me. I'm not going anywhere." Sam smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know." The boy's cryptic response unsettled Victor, but before he could say more, Sam stood up, wobbling slightly. Victor reached out to steady him, his alarm growing. "Hey, take it easy." "I'm fine," Sam insisted, though his voice was weak. He started walking again, and Victor reluctantly followed, keeping close. It wasn't long before Sam stumbled, clutching his chest. Victor caught him just in time, lowering him gently to the ground. "Sam," he exclaimed, panic surging through him. "What's wrong? Talk to me." Sam's breathing was shallow, his face pale. I didn't want you to worry," he murmured. "It's been like this for a while." Victor's heart pounded. "Like what? What's going on? You need help." Sam shook his head weakly. "It's okay. I knew this might happen. Just promise me something." Victor leaned closer, desperate to keep the boy conscious. "Anything, Sam. Just stay with me. Promise me you'll keep going." Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. "Even if I'm not here, promise you'll find your path." Victor's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. "Don't talk like that. You're not going anywhere. I'm getting you help." He fumbled for his phone, dialing emergency services with trembling hands. The seconds felt like hours as he relayed their location, his voice shaking with urgency. Sam's eyes fluttered shut, and Victor shook him gently. "Stay with me, Sam. Help's on the way." When the ambulance arrived, Victor rode with Sam to the hospital, his mind racing with fear and guilt. He'd spent so much time wrapped up in his own world, and now, this boy who had shown him so much was slipping through his fingers. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed around Sam, rushing him into an examination room. Victor was left in the waiting area, pacing back and forth, his thoughts a whirlwind. He realized how much Sam had come to mean to him in such a short time. The boy wasn't just a guide on this strange journey. He was a reminder of the humanity Victor had buried beneath years of ambition and detachment. Hours passed, and a doctor finally approached. "Are you family?" she asked gently. Victor hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I'm his family." The doctor's expression softened. "Sam's condition is serious. He's stable for now, but he'll need ongoing care. He mentioned he'd been unwell for some time. Did you know about this?" Victor shook his head, guilt washing over him. "I didn't. He never told me." The doctor sighed. "He's a strong kid, but he'll need support. I'd recommend staying close." Victor nodded, his chest tightening. "I'm not going anywhere." When he was finally allowed to see Sam, the boy was hooked up to monitors, his small frame looking even smaller in the hospital bed. Victor sat beside him, taking his hand. Sam opened his eyes briefly, his gaze meeting Victor's. "You stayed," he whispered. Victor squeezed his hand. "Of course I did, and I'm not leaving. You're stuck with me, kid." Sam smiled faintly, and though his voice was weak, his words carried a strength Victor hadn't heard before. "Then you'll be okay." Victor didn't fully understand what Sam meant, but he nodded anyway, determined to keep the promise he'd made. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let this boy's wisdom or their journey together fade into memory. Victor sat by Sam's hospital bed, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor filling the silence. Sam's face was pale, his energy depleted, but his presence was as steady as ever. Despite everything, the boy still carried an air of quiet strength that humbled Victor. It had been hours since Sam had fallen asleep, his small frame rising and falling with shallow breaths. Victor hadn't left his side, not even to grab a meal or stretch his legs. He couldn't bring himself to. The memories of their time together replayed in Victor's mind. Sam's laughter, his simple yet profound observations, and his unyielding belief in finding the hidden path. It all felt like a dream, as if Sam had appeared out of nowhere to remind him of the things he had long forgotten. And yet, here he was, very real and very fragile. Victor's chest tightened with guilt and determination. He had spent years building wealth, yet in the face of this boy's illness, he felt powerless. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, Sam stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. Victor leaned forward, relief washing over him. "Morning, champ," he said softly. Sam offered a weak smile. "You're still here?" "Of course I'm still here," Victor replied, forcing a lightness into his tone. "I told you you're stuck with me." Sam chuckled faintly, but it quickly turned into a cough. Victor reached for the water on the bedside table, helping him take a sip. "Thanks," Sam murmured, settling back into the pillows. He was quiet for a moment before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you think about it?" "Think about what?" Victor asked. "The promise," Sam said, his eyes steady despite his weakness. "About keeping going, even if I'm not around." Victor's throat tightened. "Sam, you're going to be around. We're going to get through this together." Sam smiled gently, a knowing look in his eyes. "You don't have to say that. Just tell me you'll do something good with what you've got." Victor swallowed hard, the weight of the boy's words settling over him. He nodded, his voice breaking as he replied, "I promise, Sam. I'll do better. I'll make it count." Sam seemed satisfied with that. He closed his eyes again, his breathing evening out as he drifted back to sleep. Victor sat back in his chair, staring out the window as the city woke up beyond the glass. The boy's words echoed in his mind, stirring something deep within him. In the days that followed, Sam remained in the hospital, undergoing treatment. Victor became a constant presence, speaking with doctors, arranging care, and learning more about the boy's condition. But he didn't stop there. He began reaching out to the community center Sam had introduced him to, offering to fund repairs and expansion. He didn't just write checks. He showed up, rolling up his sleeves to help clean, paint, and organize. For the first time in years, Victor felt connected to something beyond himself. Word spread quickly. Volunteers, inspired by his efforts, began showing up in droves. People who had benefited from the center's programs came to share their stories, thanking Victor for his generosity. Each story humbled him further, reminding him that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he'd never imagined. One evening, while taking a break from painting the community center's walls, Victor sat with a woman who had first recognized him. They shared a simple meal of sandwiches and coffee, sitting on the steps of the building. She looked at him thoughtfully, her expression a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You're different now," she said. "When I first saw you, you were polite but distant. Now, it's like you're here, really here." Victor nodded, his gaze distant. "Sam has a way of making you see things differently. He reminds me of everything I forgot to care about." The woman smiled. "He's special, that boy. But so are you, in your own way. It's good to see you using what you've got for something bigger than yourself." Victor didn't respond immediately. He stared at the skyline, the city lights twinkling in the distance. For once, they didn't feel cold or overwhelming. They felt alive, like they belonged to something larger, something he was finally a part of. Back at the hospital, Sam's condition began to stabilize, though he remained weak. Victor visited daily, bringing stories of the community center's progress and sharing photos of the renovations. Sam's eyes lit up each time, his small victories of health mirrored by the larger victories outside his hospital room. On the day the community center reopened, Victor brought Sam along. The boy, though frail, insisted on walking through the doors on his own, his eyes wide as he took in the transformation. The walls were bright and welcoming, the rooms filled with supplies and people ready to help. Children played in the refurbished activity area, and the kitchen bustled with volunteers serving meals. Sam turned to Victor, his face glowing with pride. "You did this," he said. Victor shook his head. "No, we did this." Sam grinned. And for the first time since their journey began, Victor felt a sense of peace. The hidden path wasn't a place or a thing. It was the act of giving, connecting, and creating something bigger than himself. And in that moment, he realized he had found it. The day the community center reopened marked a turning point for Victor. As he stood at the entrance, watching families stream in and children run toward the play area, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The building had come alive, no longer just a structure, but a beacon of hope for the neighborhood. People greeted him warmly, shaking his hand, thanking him for his contributions. But Victor knew the thanks didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to everyone who had come together, inspired by something much greater than any one person. Sam sat on a bench near the newly renovated garden, a blanket draped over his lap. Though still recovering, he insisted on being there, his presence a quiet reassurance for Victor. Every time someone approached Victor to share their gratitude, Victor glanced at Sam, silently acknowledging the boy as the true heart of this transformation. It was Sam's unwavering belief in something better, something meaningful, that had set everything in motion. As the day wound down, Victor joined Sam on the bench. The boy looked tired but content, his gaze fixed on the children playing tag in the open courtyard. "You know," Sam said after a while, "I think this is it." Victor turned to him, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Sam smiled faintly. "The hidden path. It's not about finding a place or a thing. It's about moments like this, when you're surrounded by people, making life better for each other. I think this is what my mom meant." Victor let the words sink in, a warm, bittersweet feeling settling in his chest. "You were right all along," he admitted. "I just didn't see it Sam leaned back against the bench, his small frame seeming even smaller against the wide expanse of the world around them. "You see it now," he said simply. "That's what matters." The two of them sat in companionable silence, the sounds of laughter and chatter filling the air. For Victor, the moment felt almost sacred. He thought back to where he had been just weeks ago, lost, disconnected, drowning in the emptiness of a life built on material success. Now, he felt anchored, not by possessions or accolades, but by purpose. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Victor threw himself into projects that extended beyond the community center, using his resources to fund programs for education, housing, and healthcare in underserved areas. But this time, it wasn't about writing checks or putting his name on plaques. It was about being present, showing up, listening, and connecting with the people he was helping. Sam, though still battling his illness, remained a central figure in Victor's life. The boy visited the community center often, always greeted with hugs and high fives from the volunteers and families who had come to know him. Victor made sure Sam had access to the best medical care available, but the boy's spirit remained his most powerful weapon against the challenges he faced. One crisp autumn afternoon, Victor took Sam to a hill overlooking the city. The leaves had turned shades of gold and crimson, and the air was cool and clear. Sam leaned against Victor's side, bundled in a thick jacket, his eyes scanning the horizon. "This is my favorite view," Sam said, his voice soft. Victor smiled. "It's beautiful, peaceful." Sam nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I think my mom would have liked you." Victor's chest tightened, and he placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. "I wish I could have met her, but I think I understand her through you." Sam didn't reply, but his smile was all the answer Victor needed. They sat there for a long time, watching the city hum with life below them. Months later, on a bright spring morning, the community center held a special celebration. It wasn't just for the progress they'd made, but for the people who had come together to make it happen. Victor gave a short speech, his words simple but heartfelt, thanking the community for showing him the true meaning of connection and purpose. He looked out at the crowd, spotting Sam sitting in the front row, his smile as bright as ever. As the event wound down, Victor walked over to Sam, who was sitting with a group of children, telling them stories. The kids hung on his every word, their laughter ringing out like music. Victor waited until Sam finished, then crouched beside him. "Ready to go home?" Victor asked. Sam nodded, but his expression turned serious. "Are you happy now?" he asked. Victor paused, the question catching him off guard. He thought about the journey they'd been on, the changes he'd made, and the people he'd met along the way. For the first time in years, the answer came easily. "I am," he said. "Thanks to you." Sam's smile widened. "Good. Then I think my job here is done." Victor frowned slightly, not fully understanding. But before he could ask what Sam meant, the boy stood up, his laughter blending with the children around him. As Victor watched Sam run off to join the others, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The boy had given him something no amount of money or power could ever buy: a new beginning, a path worth walking, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what lay ahead. I know you guys have already subscribed till now, but if you have not, do like, share, and subscribe.